Hey GQ, this is Josh. I'm a neurology resident, and these are my essentials. So let's talk bags. Every neurologist needs a bag to carry all the tools that they need. My bag of choice is this belt bag, specifically by Lululemon. It's very small, very compact, fits pretty much everything that I need. I know some neurologists that can carry around entire briefcases, but that's really not necessary, especially with the evolution of smaller tools and also how we kind of just MRI pretty much everything. You can kind of just wear it like this, walk around, hands are free, and if there's a code, you can kind of run without any restrictions. A lot of my next essentials are stuff that's actually inside this bag. Main thing being pen lights. So the pen light is mainly for acute changes in the pupil. Typically in like opioid overdoses, we can see constriction of the pupil. That's really easy to tell with the pen light. Quick exam, you can give some Narcan to reverse that. Sometimes when there's dilated pupils, can be indicative of things like stimulants or worst case brain herniation and things of that nature. But a good pen light can really determine the quality of your exam. And I kind of have 3 levels of pen lights here, with this one being my favorite, as I'll get into in a second. So on this side, we're starting with the most basic pen light. It's very blue, kind of casts a little bit of shadow, a little bit glaring to the user when kind of shining in the patient's eyes. This one's a little bit better, but I don't know if you can tell on the camera. It has more of a shadow kind of around the central area, so sort of lights up the area around the pupil, which can kind of alter your exam. This one's my favorite actually, mostly because it's also a warm red light, and the circle it casts is really sharp. There's almost pretty much no shadow, making it my favorite, and it's also, unfortunately, the most expensive of these 3. Can't talk about neurology without hammers. There's many different types. It kind of depends on how well you like your balance. This one is particularly very head heavy. There's another kind of hammer that's very round. There's ones that are kind of equal on both ends, but this one has more of a fine head, and then this one's a little bit thicker. But essentially, you want to see if the patient's reflexes are increased, which indicates more upper motor neuron, which basically means it involves the brain and spinal cord, versus lower motor neuron, which means more of a peripheral deficit. And if reflexes are normal, it doesn't really help you out too much, but it can kind of point you in the right direction of the underlying pathology. Next here we have a tuning fork. Very much tests just vibration, sensation, and proprioception as well. It's very useful in patients that come in with spinal cord injuries from falls, from car accidents. We can kind of get a sensory level of where the deficit is before we get a scan. It's also helpful in patients who kind of have come in feeling a little bit with the flu, particularly young patients, and they have something called Guillain-Barré, which is an ascending sort of paralysis and sensory loss. You can also use it for diabetic patients, since high blood sugars over time can kind of demyelinate your peripheral nerves. And here's just some ASMR for you guys. And this isn't an essential, but it's an honorable mention. This is a monofilament. Essentially has this little filament here, very light, and there's a little chart here on the back that I'll zoom in a bit. It shows places on the feet to kind of test, and people with diabetes or any other sort of demyelinating disease won't really be able to feel when you're poking them with this very painless filament. So it's purely a sensory tool. You usually see it in the outpatient, not in the acute setting, but it's something that I also carry. This is also an essential, normal saline. Typically I use this when I have patients who have severe brain injury and I'm testing for the brain death reflexes, specifically the corneal reflex. So as you know, if someone, even if it just wind kind of blows into your eye, you feel like it's raining and then water drop comes into your eye, your reflexes kind of have to blink or at least squint a little bit. That's the corneal reflex. So instead of having something physically touch the eye and risk infection, I typically just use sterile, normal saline, just drop it into each eye and see if there's any corneal reflex. So this is definitely an essential, especially when I'm in the neurocritical care unit. Oh, this is a good one. So not an essential for everybody, but This is lidocaine. It is empty because you're technically not supposed to take lidocaine outside the hospital, as I did not. This is an empty bottle. You usually find it in the lumbar puncture sets. Lidocaine is essentially an anesthetic that you can inject under the skin. We usually use it to kind of numb up the area before sticking a needle into the spine. It sounds very painful, but with this, it becomes a very painless process. You can also use, not necessarily lidocaine, but there's bupivacaine and other sort of kind of nerve blocking agents that we use when we try to use ultrasound to scan the nerves, find kind of where the ganglion is, and inject around it to kind of numb up the area where the nerve innervates and provide pain relief that way to many patients. So this is just a general swab stick. Basically, it's a wooden stick it sometimes has a cotton swab on the end of it. You can either use that or a tongue depressor, which I'll put here. But this is more so to test the gag reflex. And if it specifically has like iodine like this on the end, it has a particular smell. So you kind of place it under the nose, and that's cranial nerve 1. And we can test it that way. But smell usually isn't a cranial nerve that's tested at all, mostly because if you lose your sense of smell, it doesn't really have any implications. But what's interesting is that back when COVID was a thing in 2020, a good fraction of people lost their sense of smell from COVID and never really got it back, and we're not really sure why. Very underutilized, but the Snell chart, or at least a small version of it. This is very important when we get consults for patients who have vision loss or decreased vision. A good chunk of the time it'll be because the patient wears contacts or glasses and then just didn't bring it to the emergency room, so I have to deal with a lot of that. But in other times it really is true vision loss, and it has both letters and numbers, and you can kind of ask the patient to read it front to back, right, left, just so they don't memorize the pattern when you're kind of going through it. And there's also a little chart here that's also on my pen lights of pupil size. You can kind of gauge how reactive they are to light, and maybe it's like a light through the eye issue preventing them from reading, versus if their pupil is normal, you want to think of something further back in the eye that's kind of affecting their vision and what brought them into the hospital. Now, not every neurologist uses this every day, but I would definitely say it's still an essential, at least for me at this point in my career. The heart is still a very important organ. But when someone comes in with a stroke, there are many causes. High blood pressure is the most common, but one of the lesser common, but still among the top 5, is irregular heart rhythms can cause strokes. So that's why when you have a patient, you should always listen to their heart. If the rhythm is irregular, something we call atrial fibrillation is the most common one. The irregular rhythm can kind of form clots because it's beating irregularly and blood starts to pool. And those clots can go to the brain and cause strokes. So it's always important, regardless of what specialty you are, what you're consulted for, to listen to the patient's heart, because you can catch something that maybe the first doctor that ever saw them missed. Another essential, I think every physician should have some sort of paper or notebook, kind of a running document of really interesting patient cases, people they've saved, patients that we've lost, because medicine's tough, and I think writing about it makes it easier to process the illnesses that you see. And for the ones that end up doing well and are interesting, those make for good publications and case reports. But ever since I started residency, I've kind of been writing down various cases I've seen where I learned a lot about myself. And there you have it. Those are my essentials. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, time to fit everything into this bag. So yeah, that's how I carry my stuff.